My daughter Hannah and I spent an incredible day in San Francisco, where we got to do everything we wanted, except for one notable exception, and that was to tour the island that houses the famous Alcatraz, the prison, and the people. So fascinating.
Very.
While this continues to simmer on my bucket list, I've been gathering information about the backstory, and wow, I mean, there's so many layers of interesting. Today, I'll take Sandy and all of you on a journey to the creepy and amazing details about Alcatraz.
So, Carol Beth, I want to know, how close did y'all get to Alcatraz when you were there?
So what was fascinating is our ship, we docked in San Francisco, which is a beautiful experience to begin with, because you get to, if you wake up early and you stand out on your balcony, you can look up and see as you're going under the Golden Gate Bridge. So it was one of the cooler experiences I've ever had. And then as we were docked, we could look over and see Alcatraz. Like, it felt like you could just swim past the sea lions and get to Alcatraz. And I'd never seen it up close until that time, so I was mesmerized. And then when you get off the ship, you walk past the ferry. So it depends on where you dock on a cruise, but you could essentially just walk around the corner and get on the ferry to Alcatraz, which is a 15-minute ride across the water to get there. So remarkably close, right?
Well, that seems like a really cool, like if you just wanted to do one or two things in San Francisco on a cruise excursion, that sounds perfect.
Yes.
Being so perfect. Close. I didn't realize how close it was.
I didn't either. And it was a surprise to me. I think we had so much we wanted to do in San Francisco that we hit different places, and we just ran out of time. And Alcatraz could have easily been the last thing that we did that day, but I just didn't know it well enough. So learn from my mistake. I feel like we could have squeezed it in. But now my whole family wants to go back and do it. So we're just going to have to go back and get there.
Absolutely.
So I know that you look at it from the viewpoint of a travel advisor. So can you give us a quick primer on actually going to see Alcatraz, what it would be like as a traveler?
Yes. So even though this is a government-owned island, we figured out that there is no fee to actually tour Alcatraz, but you've got to book through Alcatraz City Cruises is what it's called. This will help you tour, and it covers both your water transportation, it covers your chosen tour, and it depends on what kind of tour you choose. You can do anything from the entire bay. You can tour at night, which would be kind of creepy in my opinion.
Yeah,
I don't know that that one's for me. But you can also get access to the cell house and all the where the inmates would actually be. Yes. And you can even explore behind the scenes, which now that would be up my alley. I think that would be really cool.
It would be
but
interesting.
The pricing varies that we've seen from about $25 a person up to $91, depending on how in depth your tour wants to be. And we're going to put that link for you on 3dtravelcast.com.
That's great. I will, because I was researching it, of course, it pops up in all my social media. Visit Alcatraz, tour Alcatraz, and even that alone is fascinating. It's like, do you want to see where Al Capone slept? I was like, I asked myself, I don't know. Do I want to see where Al Capone slept?
I don't know.
I'm not really sure.
I think it would be cool. I do. I think it would be really neat. I'd want to see it.
Yes. And that's the truth, is I want to see all the things,
True.
But trying to decide what you want is, I don't know. It's all interesting. So we're going to jump really quickly through the history of the island, just to bring you up to the prison portion. So it was actually called La Isla, or La Isla? No, I would think La Isla.
Isla. That's actually,
Isla?
Well, I've heard
in Spanish?
Isla.
I think that's right. A-E-O.
I don't know.
We're going to say Isla. La Isla de los Alcatraces. La Isla de los Alcatraces. Yeah.
There you go. That sounded good.
Well, I should be able to read Spanish. We won't even talk about that. But so it was discovered. The local people, the native people, knew that it was there, but it was discovered by Spain, and then eventually the U.S. got California in the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and so they wanted it because it was a rocky fortress. So it was a time of still instability, and it was when they got the state of California, right? But they wanted that island included because they could build like a military stronghold there. And that's what they did. And as early as the Civil War, they housed prisoners.
Oh,
which
really?
I had no idea.
That
That far back.
Okay.
And the treatment was so bad that they called it Uncle Sam's Devil Island.
Oh, wow.
And then word got out about how bad it was. And the embarrassed government left. They stopped having the federal prison there. And within weeks, a new system moved in. And that was the system that housed these notorious criminals. And it became Alcatraz. And I think that's the part where everyone is fascinated, right?
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to assume this is like Supermax. Like when you think of prisons today, you would think of this one as Supermax. Obviously,
yes.
There's nobody
and
there
we're going to talk
anymore,
about that. Yeah, it's crazy.
So what exactly made it like that? What made it so enticing to put a prison there? Because that's a really long way to get all of these prisoners out there. Why take them that far?
Now, so the military, I think that it was more of a visual, that they wanted to have this visual look of a stronghold of a prison, and so it was all about optics. But when it became Alcatraz, they had some really unique, specific rules that made that little island as locked down as you can get. So everyone believed that there were sharks in the bay, which is interesting. Every time I read about it, it's like they believed there were sharks in the bay, which does that mean there weren't sharks in the bay? I don't know, but I guess it doesn't really matter if you think they're there. The way the tides roll, it could carry you out to sea or it could carry you to shore. And so there was no outside communication. It's not like now when you're in prison and you have the internet, and you have the radio. There's not really a way to keep people from having information. At this point, they could tell them what they wanted them to believe. And so they would not get access to things like the tides. They also, when they began Alcatraz as a prison, as a federal prison, what they were doing is they were taking people who were embarrassing them. Just truly embarrassing them.
Oh.
Yes. So I was talking to a couple of people about this, and the question I kept asking is, and maybe you'll get it, Sandy, I don't know. What do artists, especially Renaissance artists, criminals in this time period, and current day influencers have in common? It's a weird question.
That is really weird. Okay, let me think.
You have to think of the Renaissance artists, like they were painting pictures all over this at the time of the Sistine Chapel and all these amazing things. And they would paint, they had these beautiful, they called them palaces, and they were big houses in parts of Europe, right? And so they were the what of the day. They were the celebrity of the day.
I was going to say they had followers. Because that's what I think is one. Yeah. Would that be?
Yeah, followers.
Would that make,
yes. You're on the right line of thinking. In my head, like it's a celebrity culture, the culture of fame. So like right now, and there's always been someone who, not necessarily because of what they're doing, but because they're so interesting to watch and we're fascinated with them, they become famous and everybody's watching them. And so it was fascinating to me to go through Europe and hear about these painters and these artists that became like almost like watching a soap opera. Like if you look up in the Sistine Chapel in different areas, you'll see where Michelangelo painted different people that he didn't like very much in an unflattering way. And then if you go and you look at another artist that paints and he has something, so it's like there's all this stuff in there. Like obviously it wasn't as fast as social media, like it lives forever, but everybody was fascinated by them. They lived these notorious lives. And if you look now, it's the social media people, right? And they're living these lives that are fascinating to watch. Even if you don't like them, you're fascinated with the train wrek that you're watching. This is what it was like with the criminals. And that, like, you think, we know it still lingers, Bonnie and Clyde. Like, they're horrible.
They were in my mind when you started talking about this because they had kind of like a cult following.
They did, and they were grotesque.
Yes.
The whole musical Chicago is built around this kind of concept of, and gangsters, and there's almost like a romance to it. But we don't really want to look under the covers. We don't really want to know what they're doing. But what was happening is these people that everybody was watching because they're fascinated, they kept escaping from prisons. And they would escape and be like for 30 years. There's some of them they didn't ever find. So they kept getting away, and then they would just commit more crimes. So it looked kind of like the cartels when we look at the Mexican cartels and we're like, who's in charge, the government or the cartels? That's what our government was dealing with. Who's in charge?
Now I see what you're saying about the embarrassment. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
That makes sense now.
So they were like, they basically, so I feel like they had a marketing machine before they knew what a marketing machine was, a PR person, right? Who said, okay, this is like, and you look and it's in the middle of the water and there's supposed to be sharks around it. And they had, at any given time, there was, because they really did take these guys seriously, there were 2 layers of barbed wire between a prisoner and the water.
Oh my goodness.
And the ratio normally is 60-1. It was a 2-1 ratio. 2-1 ratio. Which is fascinating.
You're talking guards to prisoners?
Guards.
Oh
Yes.
my God. Wow.
So they were scared of those people. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
They were scared of them. And there was an interview that I read that there was a gentleman who's still with us, and he's done quite a few interviews, but he was one of the guards, and he talks about his first day working at Alcatraz. And he said he went in and he was supposed to guard this, like he was just guarding some of the men as they were getting their haircut, their weekly or monthly or whatever haircut. And before he could get to the guy, he had grabbed the barber's shears and stabbed him to death in front of him.
Oh my gosh.
This was the first day of his work. And it's just like, these
And
were
he
violent
stuck it out?
people. Yeah, that's fascinating too, right? He's like, I can take it. You know, maybe he's like, I don't know. They called it burying a man alive in plain view. Like if you put him on Alcatraz, they were never going to get off. And I mean, the violence makes sense because these people had no hope.
Right.
Yeah. So if you look at prisons where it's people are sentenced forever and have no hope, those are the most dangerous people because what do they have to lose?
They have nothing to lose. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So it's just incredibly fascinating. So some of the rules they had, because they also recognized how smart these people were, is that they weren't allowed for years. They were not allowed to talk to each other. They could be in a cell side by side and they couldn't talk to the person next to them. So their suicide rate went up for obvious reasons, but they didn't have anybody manage to escape.
Wow.
Right? So there was, and they had long tables that they all sat at when they ate, and they were supervised for that. There was just so many rules that you didn't see anywhere else, and they worked until they didn't. And so what happened was, because it's very interesting. First of all, there was 12 attempts before the guys made it off. I don't know if you knew that. So
I did not.
Yes, 12 attempts, and they nobody made it. So usually somebody was shot. Often many people were shot, and they took out a lot of the prison guards on the way out too. So
I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is 12 attempts, and what is the span of time? So 1934 is when all the kind of, you could say, I guess, the new Alcatraz.
The prison opens, yes.
Right. And so at what point, what these 12
until
were in a span of about how long? 62.
1962. Okay. But they were really rigid this entire time, very specific. And what was happening is having this prison be beat up constantly by the salt and the sea air. Mm-hmm. Then that concrete fortress started to wear out and they started to be able to chip away at little bits and pieces. And then they relaxed some of their rules, like what happens over time, because they bought into their own mystique that nobody was ever going to get away. And for the most part, I mean, they had a reason to believe, but there was 4 men who were smart enough to make a plan and be willing to work over a year on this plan. And Sandy mentioned that she watched the movie, and my husband David did too. And you loved
It's an amazing
movie. It's a pretty old movie. It's like from the 70s or something, right?
Yeah, it's Clint Eastwood. I love Clint Eastwood. I tend to watch almost everything. I think I've watched everything, but it is a fascinating movie. But it is, and if I'm not mistaken, his character was kind of the brainchild, the ringleader behind a lot of it.
The one who wasn't one
movie.
of the brothers. Yes,
he was not one of the brothers. He was Frank. I don't know his last name, but
it's Frank Morris.
I don't know the true history. I'm sure the movie is fairly close, but Carol Beth knows more about that. But once they started making some of these changes, that's when these guys.
That's when the windows. Because they could. So that there was 4 men that were working together, and they were in cell blocks 2 and 2. So the 2 people could talk to each other, and then what they did was they slowly dug away a little space. They made a false front, and they dug away a little space, right? And they had to work on it all the time. So one person could be a lookout, and the other person could be working, so they never got caught. If they had just been a lone man, hoping that nobody busted them, that wouldn't have worked. Right. Mm-hmm. So there was ways that they did that. And then I don't know if they showed this in the movie, that there was an hour of music each day that they got to do. So
I don't think I remember that.
I had no idea. So they were able to, they didn't have much to live for, but people who could play instruments were allowed 1 hour a day. They had access to instruments. And so for that 1 hour, the prison would fill with music. And I'm sure everybody needed it. So there was probably lots of singing. Right. And that's when they could do the things that were louder. Mm-hmm. So there was a place that 3 of the 4 would go up and work on their raft. The raft that they got away in was, they slowly accumulated raincoats. And then they used the steam from pipes. They figured out how to, from reading like a magazine, they figured out how to turn something into glue. And they created this raft. I mean, it's a pretty amazing escape attempt.
So think about
all the different pieces.
Think about what these men, how genius this was, what they could have accomplished if they were engineers or whatever else, as opposed to escaping from prison.
And for all we know, they did escape, and they did, because they never found any bodies. So we just don't know. Another thing that I didn't mention, they had 13 daily head counts in that prison.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. And they didn't allow anyone to gather. And if someone did anything disrespectful, they threw them in the hole, which was horrific. And okay, I'm going to start with throwing them in the hole, David. So if anybody did anything that looked like they hit a prison guard or something like that, they would get thrown in the hole, and they were naked, and they just pitched them in there, and it was just a horrifying circumstance.
I can only imagine.
And they would leave them for weeks at a time, and some people went insane, and some people were suicidal. Mm-hmm. So I said that wrong. It was absolutely everything you would think that most humans would not be able to walk towards escape, when they could get shot on the roof or they could get thrown in the hole. But then you look at it, the fact that they had nothing to lose, and there was a history of people managed to escape. That had to keep them alive. Mm-hmm. It's like some of these guys were there because they escaped from a lot of other prisons. In fact, the gentleman that you're talking about,
Frank,
that he was not notorious for the violence of his crime. He was notorious for escaping.
That's what they did. That was in the movie. I thought that was interesting.
So the flip side of this, and why I'm totally fascinated with Alcatraz for a new reason, is that there was another side of the island that was made up of the people who took care of the prisoners. They had a lot of people there, and it was families. So there were 300 people who lived on Alcatraz in a little community, which it gives me goosebumps in a weird, chilly kind of way. Like, the pictures of the children are precious. I watched some of the interviews with them. They had a bowling alley and a convenience store. They had a soda shop and, of course, a school. Because going back and forth every day, shipping people back and forth, they needed so many people on deck that they created a community. They called it the poor man's Hawaii. That's what a lot of them called it.
Really?
And they would
never
live there.
Heard that.
Yes. And they were never, was there any problems, like security-wise or anything like that. But they lived right there. And the kids were not allowed to speak to the prisoners, but they could see them. Like when they were in the yard, there would be barbed wire and stuff. And one child said that, well, she's not a child anymore, that she has a memory of a prisoner being allowed to pass a ball back to her. And she said she had a crisis because she wanted to say thank you as a good little girl, but she knew she couldn't talk to them. So she had that moment that only children can have, is what am I supposed to do in this situation? Isn't that fascinating?
Oh my goodness. It's
I know.
Sweet and sad at the same time. Like to have that memory, to grow up with such violence and frankly, evil so close next to you, and to retain some of your innocence. That's a fine line.
Yes, it is. And I didn't hear a negative interview, which was fascinating to me all by itself. And I'm sure it was, more of that time period. So the women did stay home. So the stability was there in a way that we probably couldn't replicate in this time period, because all the women stayed home and all the children had a very structured life, and the husbands went to work in the prison and came back.
In the prison.
And yes, it's fascinating. Another thing that changed, I mentioned those long dining room tables that had 10 people down the length of the table. Well, they changed it to where it was 4 at a table. So they brought in new tables, and that was one of the final pieces of the puzzle. So they could, every day during mealtime, they could make plans.
There was planning
on what they were going to do. And the paper mache masks are real. You can actually see them. So
they did do that. They did. In the movie, this is how the movie went. So tell me if the movie got this right. Is one of the guys worked in the barber shop, and every day he would bring back to his cell hair from that day in his pockets, and they glued that to the top of the paper mache masks. This is what happened in the movie. Did you read that?
No. And so that is fascinating. We're going to have to dig into that a little bit more. There are so many. This is one of those things, like in the middle of the night when you can't sleep and you go to IMDb and you look up one actor and then you end up going to one movie. This is with Alcatraz. You could it's an endless funnel of interesting. And I think because it was positioned so big, it's like, this is the prison and we've got it covered. And honestly, because they did that and they pinned all their hopes on it, after the escape, it shut down within months.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And they sent everybody to other prisons. Yeah. It's fascinating. The paper mache masks look like the stuff I made in middle school. So it's just, it's amazing to me that they did that. And when the alarm wasn't sounded, I don't even know if that's grammatically correct. The alarm didn't sound. They didn't know until someone went to wake someone up because they did the morning call and he wasn't there. Yeah. But one of the guys,
I wonder how long they were out of their cell by the time that they were, that the alarm sounded. Like, how long did they have to get away from? It
sounds like it was overnight. Like it was
really
overnight that they were able to do that. There was a place where when they climbed up, because they climbed up through a raft. So what they did was they dug holes, for people who haven't seen the movie. They dug holes with spoons, there's a lot of jokes about that, so that they could get access to a passageway that would take them up to the roof using ductwork. So one guy who was the fourth didn't make it. He supposedly never tested out his hole until that day. The reason that's weird is they had to use those holes to go up and make the rafts. So did he just never take a shift to go up and make the raft? So there's a little something that was a little confusing to me in there. Yeah, so there's a piece missing to that I'm sure that I will not be able to help stop. And we'll probably write an article or do a part 2, or someday we'll go and then we can ask the people there. But
that's right.
So they went and they dug these holes. They went up there. They had this raft that they built and made it. And then the paper mache mask was a way that they used that when they would go up and work on the raft. So they used those masks even when they were working already. So they knew that they worked for overnight stuff. But when they came up out of it, on the day they were escaping, there was a loud bang. The rest of the prison rose up and made noise as loud as they could because they were like, they all supported the idea that someday someone's going to get out and we'll all have hope.
I'm trying to remember if the movie portrayed that. I don't. So they all supported these guys. I love that.
They did. So there was bang, 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 and they was making all this noise. So there was no way anybody could tell where it was coming from. And the prisoners, I'm sure, knew that something was afoot. But no, they didn't discover them until the next morning when they tried to get them up.
You know what I
find
funny?
Guys was up. What?
These are criminals we're talking about. These people have done something wrong to get themselves put into this place. And they're like almost heroes. They're heroes to the other guys.
We're start talking to identify about them with them.
Right. Fascinated by them. Now, granted, I don't know what their crimes were. And in many cases, the treatment they received at Alcatraz might not have even been fit punishment for what they did. Exactly. But I just find it fascinating that we are talking about these guys like cultural heroes because they escaped from prison, but essentially they did something
because they're the underdog
there.
In that situation. I just thought about that too. Like, what is it? Because I think you start to identify with someone, and the idea of being trapped in this scenario sounds horrifying.
Absolutely.
And it's just awful, awful, awful. I do think a lot about like the whole I do think a lot about the whole underdog thing because any movie that comes out, if you can get me to buy into this guy's the little guy trying to overcome, and then he overcomes, like I'm sold. Like you can take me on that emotional story ride. And I think that's one reason why people do identify with some of these criminals and that are trying to get out, you know. But I did not look up any of their crimes on purpose because I didn't want to know.
Don't know what
that
they
is
were.
not the fun part. So there is, I will mention too. So even though we didn't make it to Alcatraz, the island, to tour, there is a souvenir shop. And it's actually at the same pier. Oh goodness, Pier 61, I think it is. It's the one where you can see the sea lions. Mm-hmm. So there's multiple piers where you can see sea lions, but this was the favorite one to go see sea lions, which is just so much fun. They're smelly and they're loud and they're like toddlers. And you can see past that to Alcatraz. They're hysterical. And on the second floor of this little area of it feels like a boardwalk and shops. There is a Alcatraz gift shop, and it's full of things like hats, and you can be an Alcatraz prisoner. That was super fun. And at the end of the day, when we got back on the ship, we were on a ship that they take through Alaska and different places. So had some of the beautiful overlook, and we sat there, and we weren't overlooking glaciers. We were watching Alcatraz. So it was.
It's that morbid curiosity. It is. You just have to. You have to see what. I mean, it was horrifying what some of these people that were put there went through. Even the guards. Yeah. I'm sure that was. Yes. They saw horrors on a daily basis.
They were willing to die.
Really, It's almost like a train wreck, but a very interesting, fascinating historical train wreck.
Agreed.
But it is. There's so many famous people. There's so many more things that you can just delve into. There's so much history there. Just the fascinating people behind it.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like when we do finally go, maybe we can do it on a cruise. That would be super fun.
Oh,
that we need to do the behind the scenes, because then maybe there's a chance you could see like where the people lived that were taking care of the prisoners. I really want to see that. So we'll have to go. Worth visiting.
I didn't even know that was a thing. So to go and see this little community living on its nickname is the Rock. You're living on a rock with all of these, horrible, horrible people, and just going about your daily life.
Yes.
That's crazy.
Right?
That's crazy.
Side by side. Oh my goodness. Well, so there, yay. I brought something to the table that you didn't know yet. I'm glad. Because there's so much out there.
Yeah, it is. Fun. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about Parts of the Escape. I'm sure a lot of people have heard how horrible they were treated and stuff, but there is there is a lot of behind the scenes stuff that I just don't have a clue. I had no idea there was a community there. Right.
And the pictures, it's great. So we'll put some links, as we are known to do now, on the post that has this podcast in it, with some different things that you can go wandering down these lanes and pathways, and I don't know, maybe take a cruise with us and we'll all go visit together. And we can visit the Walt Disney Family Museum that's there in San Francisco.
Oh, yes.
And some beautiful areas. Maybe we just need a week there. It's a beautiful part of the country.
I want to go. You want, Carol Beth, knowing you're going to want to go too, unless you've already gone to the Ghirardelli factory.
Okay, see, I didn't know that it existed in San Francisco until after it was too late. I need to go. I don't just want to go. I need to go. It's chocolate is life. Chocolate and tea.
It is.
That's what, That's the best.
Chocolate and coffee here, but that's okay. I'll drink my coffee, you drink your tea, and we will split the chocolate. Or, no, we don't need to split the chocolate. We'll each get our own.
Well, that's great. Well, that's a great way to end. That's awesome. Chocolate, tea, coffee, and Alcatraz.
That is the best ending we've had, I think.
That was good.